General Vorath Kale stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Unbroken Maw, and watched the last fires burn on the surface of Arcadia 7. The human colony world had fallen in 72 hours. He had expected it to take at least a week. The humans had fought hard. He would give them that much. Their soldiers had held defensive lines with a stubbornness that surprised even his most experienced officers. But stubbornness was not enough against orbital bombardment, and courage could not stop a Dralith warfleet. In the end, the colony's military forces were crushed, their walls were broken, and their people were rounded up like livestock. Vorath had done this over 200 times. 200 worlds, 200 species brought to their knees before the Dralith Dominion. Some had begged, some had screamed, some had simply gone quiet and accepted their fate. Even in the prisoner camps, they stared at their captors with hard eyes and said nothing. It was slightly annoying, but Vorath did not think much of it. Defiance always faded with time. He turned away from the viewport and walked to the central command table where his officers were gathered. The holographic display showed the colony from above. The settlement was a grid of metal buildings surrounded by farmland, and beyond the farmland, thick alien forests stretched in every direction until it reached the northern mountain range. The mountains were tall, covered in dark trees, and filled with cave systems that the colonists had never fully explored. "Report," Vorath said. Sub-Commander Lias stepped forward. She was young for her rank, with pale green scales and sharp eyes that missed very little. She pulled up the prisoner count on the display. "We have secured 14,006 human prisoners, General. They have been sorted by skill type. Engineers, scientists, medical workers, and general laborers. Transport ships are being prepared to move them to mining worlds in the outer sectors." Vorath nodded. This was the part of war he cared least about. The fighting was the thing. The logistics of moving prisoners and setting up labor operations was boring work, but necessary. The Dominion needed resources, and conquered species provided the hands to dig them out. "What about resistance?" he asked. "Scattered," another officer said. "Small groups in the southern farmlands. They are poorly armed, and will be cleaned up within a day or two. Nothing significant." Vorath grunted. "Good. A clean operation. The Archon would be pleased." He was about to dismiss the briefing when Lias spoke again. Her voice was careful, the way it always was when she had something to say that she knew her superiors would not want to hear. "General, there is one small matter." "What?" "The colony census, which we recovered from their administrative systems, lists the total population of Arcadia 7 as 14,832. She paused. "We have 14,006. That leaves 826 unaccounted for." Vorath blinked. 800 people was not a small number, but in the chaos of an invasion, it was not unusual either. Bombardment killed people in ways that left nothing behind. Some would have fled into the wilderness. Some records were simply wrong. "Casualties and runners," he said. "Send scout teams into the surrounding forest to sweep for survivors. They will turn up." Lias did not move. She was looking at her data screen with an expression that Vorath could not quite read. "General," she said slowly, "I cross-referenced the missing population against the colony's demographic records. The 826 missing residents are not random. They are almost exclusively from the colony's youth education centers." The command deck went quiet. Officers glanced at each other. "Youth education centers," Vorath repeated. "Yes, General. Based on the age data, the missing are human children, between the ages of 6 and 16 standard human years." Vorath stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a low breath through his teeth and shook his head. "Children hide," he said. "They are small. They fit into places our soldiers do not check. They run into the forest and get lost. This is not unusual. Every conquered world has missing civilians after the initial operation. Send the scouts. They will find them crying in ditches and hiding in basements. Laius nodded. Yes, General, but her eyes said she was not convinced. Vorath did not care. He had more important things to worry about than lost children. He had a colony to strip, prisoners to transport, and a full report to file with the Archon. The children would be found, added to the prisoner count, and that would be the end of it. He dismissed the briefing and returned to his quarters. For a few hours, everything was normal. Reports came in. The Southern Resistance was being crushed. Transport ships were landing. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Then, at the 20th hour of the day, a communication officer knocked on his door. General, we have lost contact with Patrol Group 7. Vorath frowned. Where were they deployed? The northern mountain range, sir. They were conducting the sweep for missing civilians as you ordered. 30 soldiers, full combat equipment, standard communication array. Equipment malfunction? We do not think so, sir. We lost their signal all at once, not a gradual fade. All 30 transponders went dark at the same time. Vorath sat up straight. That was not equipment failure. That was not an accident. 30 transponders going dark at the same moment meant something had happened to all 30 soldiers at the same time. Send a message to their last known position, he ordered. Get me a drone over those mountains now. The communication officer nodded and hurried out. Vorath stood and walked to his viewport. He looked down at the dark mass of the northern mountains. The forest was thick and black, and the peaks were hidden in clouds. It looked like a place that did not want to be entered. 30 soldiers, full combat gear, gone in an instant. He thought about what Laius had said. 826 children missing from the colony. He thought about the mountains, the caves, the endless dark forest. For the first time since the invasion began, something cold touched the back of his mind. Vorath did not feel fear. He had conquered 200 worlds. He had faced enemies that could tear a Dralith apart with their bare hands. But something was not right about this. Something about the silence from those mountains felt wrong. It felt like the silence of a trap that had already been set, a mouth that was already open, waiting for the next thing stupid enough to walk inside. He pushed the feeling away. They were children. Whatever had happened to Patrol Group 7, it had nothing to do with children. He told himself that several times before the night was over. The drone footage showed nothing. Just trees, rocks, rivers, and silence. No bodies, no wreckage, no sign that 30 armed Dralith soldiers had ever existed. It was as if the mountain had simply swallowed them whole. General Vorath stood over the holographic display table and stared at the empty forest with his jaw tight. Around him, his officers were quiet. None of them wanted to be the first to speak. I want a full company, Vorath said. 200 soldiers, heavy weapons, thermal scanners, aerial support. They'd go in at first light. Sub-Commander Laius looked up from her data screen. General, should we not first determine what happened to the patrol before sending more troops into the same area? That is what the company is for, Vorath said. 200 soldiers do not simply vanish. Whatever killed Patrol Group 7, wildlife, human holdouts, unstable terrain, 200 soldiers with full equipment will handle it. At dawn, the company marched north. Commander Rethus led the force. He was a veteran of 40 campaigns, a soldier who had seen things that would break most minds. He moved his troops into the mountain forest in a standard sweep formation. 3 columns with overlapping fields of fire, drones overhead, thermal scanners active. By the book, clean and professional. The first 2 hours were uneventful. The forest was dense, with trees so tall that their canopy blocked most of the light. The ground was uneven, covered with roots and loose rock. It was difficult terrain, but nothing the Dralith had not handled before. Then they started finding things. A Dralith helmet, hanging from a branch by its strap. Then a rifle, taken apart into its basic components and left in a neat line on a rock, as if someone had studied every piece of it. Then communication equipment, cracked open, with specific parts removed, not smashed, not damaged by accident, taken apart with purpose. Rethis reported each finding to the flagship. Vorath listened with growing unease. "Someone is studying our equipment," Rethis said over the communication channel. His voice was calm, but careful. "This is not wildlife, General. Something intelligent did this." "Continue the sweep," Vorath ordered. "Find them." The company pushed deeper. The forest grew darker. The thermal scanners showed animal life. Small creatures in the trees, insects, nothing large, nothing threatening. Then as the sun began to set and the shadows grew long, the forest exploded. The first blast came from beneath the ground. A buried device, made from colony construction explosives packed into a metal container, went off directly under the center column. The sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. Before the dust settled, the second and third blasts hit the front and rear of the formation, collapsing trees across the path, and cutting the company into 3 isolated groups. Rethis screamed orders into his communicator. Soldiers scrambled for cover, weapons raised, scanning the trees. The thermal scanners swept the forest. And there they were, small heat signatures, dozens of them, moving through the trees with a speed that made no sense. They did not move like soldiers. They moved like water, flowing between gaps in the rocks and branches, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. They were in the canopy, on the ground, behind rocks, everywhere and nowhere. The shooting started. Drelith soldiers fired into the trees, into the shadows, at movement they could barely see. But hitting a small, fast-moving target in a dark forest was nearly impossible, and every shot gave away the shooter's position. For every burst of plasma fire a Drelith soldier sent into the trees, something came back. Rocks, sharpened sticks, small explosive devices that burst with a crack and sent metal fragments spinning through the air. And then, silence. As quickly as it began, the attack stopped. The heat signatures vanished, melting into the terrain as if they had never been there. Rethis regrouped his forces and counted his losses. 22 dead, 31 wounded, and they had not killed a single attacker. Not one. He pushed forward. He should not have. Over the next 12 hours the company was taken apart piece by piece. Not in a battle, in something worse. Every time they moved, the path ahead had changed. Rock slides blocked routes that had been clear an hour before. Trees had fallen across trails in patterns that funneled the soldiers into narrow spaces. Tripwires connected to noisemakers sent squads rushing toward false threats, while the real attack came from behind. A squad of 10 soldiers was separated from the main force by a collapsed hillside. They were found an hour later, alive but stripped of every weapon, every piece of equipment, every communication device. They had been ambushed from above by attackers they never saw. Whatever hit them had been fast, coordinated, and precise. The water supply was poisoned, not with anything deadly, but with something that caused violent stomach cramps. The soldiers who drank became useless for hours. The ones who did not drink grew weaker as the night went on. Sentries disappeared. One moment a soldier would be standing guard, the next he was simply gone. Some were found later, unconscious and tied to trees with wires stripped from Drelith equipment. Others were not found at all. By morning, Rethis had lost control of the operation. His 200 soldiers had been reduced to a stumbling, exhausted, terrified group of less than 50 effective fighters. The rest were dead, wounded, captured, or too sick to move. He ordered a retreat. The march back to base was the worst part. The attackers did not let them go easily. They harassed the retreating column every step of the way. Small attacks from the flanks. Explosions ahead that forced detours. screams from the forest that sounded almost like laughter. When Rethis finally reached the base perimeter, he was missing over 160 soldiers. He walked into the command center, stood before General Vorath, and tried to give his report. His hands were shaking. His voice broke twice. "They are small, General," he said. "Fast. They move through the forest like they were born in it. They do not fight like soldiers. They fight like something else. Something that knows the terrain, knows our equipment, knows our tactics, and treats the whole thing like some kind of game." Vorath said nothing for a long time. Then he asked the question he already knew the answer to. "What are they, Commander?" Rethis reached for his helmet and pulled up the recorded footage from his visor camera. He scrolled through hours of darkness, chaos, and screaming until he found the frame he was looking for. He froze it and projected it onto the display. The image was blurry, lit by the flash of a plasma rifle, but it was clear enough. A face, small, round, covered in dirt and streaks of dark paint, wild eyes that reflected the light like an animal's, a mouth set in a hard, thin line, the face of a child, perhaps 12 human years old. In their hands, held with confidence and steady aim, was a weapon built from the parts of a Dralith rifle. A weapon that should not have existed. A weapon that a child should not have known how to build. Vorath stared at that face for a very long time. Then he sat down at his command table and opened the Dominion's classified files on pre-invasion species assessments. He searched for the entry on humans, then scrolled past the sections on military capability, technology, and political structure. He found the section he was looking for. It was labeled Developmental Psychology, Juvenile Stage. He began to read. 20 minutes later, he was still sitting in the same chair. His face had changed. The confidence was gone. The calm certainty of a general who had conquered 200 worlds was gone. In its place was something that none of his officers had ever seen on his face before. It looked very much like fear. Dr. Salith had warned them. Before the invasion, before the first ship entered the Arcadia system, she had submitted a 40-page report to Dominion High Command, titled Risks of Engaging Homo Sapiens, a Xenoanthropological Assessment. It had been read by exactly no one who mattered. Generals did not read reports written by academics. They read kill ratios and supply estimates. So the report had been filed away, and the invasion had proceeded. Now at 3 a.m, Dr. Salith was standing in General Vorath's private briefing room, looking at the most powerful military commander in the sector, and trying very hard not to say the words she was thinking. The words were, "I told you so." Vorath sat behind his desk. He had not slept in over 30 hours. The footage from the mountains still played on a loop in the corner of the room. Small figures moving through trees, explosions, screaming soldiers, children. "Tell me about human children," he said. Salith had spent 20 years studying humans. She had lived among them, learned their languages, observed their families. She was the Dominion's foremost expert on the species, and she had been completely ignored at every stage of this operation. She took a breath and began. "To understand human children, General, you must first understand something about the human species as a whole. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest, the most armored, or the most naturally dangerous. What they are, and what makes them unlike anything else we have encountered, is adaptive. Their entire biology is built around one principle: change to survive." She pulled up a diagram of a human brain on the display screen. This is the brain of an adult human. It is impressive, but it is largely fixed. Neural pathways are established. Patterns of thought are set. An adult human can learn new things, but it takes effort and time. She changed the image to another brain. It looked similar, but the diagram was covered in bright, moving lines that connected and reconnected in constantly shifting patterns. This is the brain of a human child. What you are seeing, is called neuroplasticity. In simple terms, a child's brain is not finished. It is still building itself. It rewires constantly, forming new connections at a speed that no adult brain can match. A human child can learn a new language in weeks. An adult takes months or years. A child can observe a complex system and understand its patterns intuitively without being taught. They absorb information the way dry ground absorbs water. Vorath leaned forward. What does this mean in a combat situation? It means they learn from you faster than you can learn from them. Every tactic you use against them, they will study, understand, and counter. Not in days, in hours. You showed them your weapons, your formations, your communication systems. They have already taken that information and built something new with it. And they will keep doing it. Every time you change your approach, they will change theirs. Faster. Vorath thought about the soldier who had been found with his rifle taken apart, every piece laid out in a neat line. A child had done that. A child had taken apart a weapon system that Draylit soldiers trained for months to operate, and had studied it like a puzzle. Salith continued, but neuroplasticity is only part of it. The second factor is social bonding. Humans are pack animals. They form emotional attachments that are among the strongest in any known species, and this is especially true of their children. She brought up footage from human colonies. Children playing together, eating together, sleeping in groups. When human children are separated from their parents, they do not simply give up and wait to die. They bond with each other, quickly, deeply, and with an intensity that borders on the extreme. Within days, a group of displaced human children will form a social structure. The older ones protect the younger ones. The more skilled ones teach the less skilled ones. They assign roles. They establish rules. They create, in effect, a small society built entirely around mutual survival. A tribe, Vorath said quietly. Exactly, a tribe. And once that tribe is formed, its members will die for each other without hesitation. Adult humans may surrender to protect themselves. Children who have bonded in this way will not. They have no concept of acceptable loss. Every member of their group is family, and they will fight for family with everything they have. Vorath remembered the message scratched on the helmet visor. Give back our families. They were not just talking about the adults in the prison camps. They were talking about each other. The third factor, Silas said, is perhaps the most important, and it is the one that the Dominion has completely failed to understand. It is the role of play in human development. She showed footage of human children engaged in various activities: running, hiding, chasing each other through obstacle courses, building structures from loose materials and then defending them against other groups of children, planning ambushes, setting traps, competing in complex strategy games. Every known species has young that play, but no other species plays the way humans do. Human children do not play to pass time. They play to train. Their games are simulations of adult activities. They chase and hide from each other. That is hunting and evasion training. They build forts and defend them. That is military engineering. They form teams and compete against each other, using complex rules and strategies. That is tactical warfare. She paused to let this settle. By the age of 10 standard years, a human child has completed thousands of hours of strategic and tactical training, disguised as entertainment. They do not know they are training. They think they are having fun. But the skills are real. The instincts are real. And when those children find themselves in a real survival situation, those instincts activate. Vorath closed his eyes. He thought about the ambush patterns in the forest. The way the children had separated his company into isolated groups and then picked them off. The way they had used the terrain, the high ground, the narrow passages. He had seen those patterns before. Not in military textbooks, in descriptions of human children's games. capture the flag, hide and seek, tag. They had turned their games into war, and they were very, very good at their games. There is one more thing, Salith said. Her voice had grown quiet, and Vorath could hear something in it that he did not like. It sounded like pity, but not for the children. Adult humans have complex moral systems. They can weigh consequences, consider mercy, calculate the cost of violence against the cost of peace. They can be reasoned with, negotiated with, even convinced to surrender if the terms are fair. She looked directly at Vorath. Children do not have these systems, not fully. A child's morality is simple and absolute. There is safe and there is dangerous. There is friend and there is enemy. There is protect and there is destroy. There is no middle ground. There is no negotiation. Once a human child has decided that you are a threat to their people, you are a threat forever. They will not stop. They will not get tired of fighting. They will not lose interest. They do not have the emotional machinery for surrender. The briefing room was completely silent. General, Salith said, adult humans are dangerous because they choose to fight. Their children are dangerous because they do not know how to stop. Vorath opened his eyes. He looked at the frozen image on the screen, the child's face, lit by gunfire. Wild eyes. Steady hands. What do you recommend? He asked. Return their families, immediately. Open negotiations with the adults, and give the children back their parents. A human child with a parent is a child. A human child without a parent, surrounded by enemies with nothing left to lose. She shook her head. That is something else entirely. Something this Dominion is not prepared to fight. Vorath sat in silence for a long time after Salith left. Then he activated the colony-wide communication system and broadcast a message toward the mountains. Surrender terms, fair treatment, food, water, and safe passage. He offered everything he could think of. The response came 6 hours later. Not a message, a Drelith helmet, placed on a sharpened pole at the tree line, where his scouts could see it. The visor had been scratched with a sharp rock. The letters were rough and uneven, clearly carved by small hands, but the message was perfectly clear in Galactic Common. Give back our families. Vorath stared at those 4 words for a long time. Then he contacted Dominion High Command and requested reinforcements. Archon Drail's face appeared on the screen. He was old, powerful, and had never lost a war. He looked at Vorath with amusement. For a colony world that has already been conquered, the situation in the northern mountains has become complicated, Archon. Complicated how? We are facing organized resistance from a force of approximately 800 human combatants who have fortified the mountain range. 800? You have 10 times that number in orbit. Who are these combatants? Vorath hesitated. He knew how the next words would sound. He said them anyway. They are children, Archon. Human children between the ages of 6 and 16. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. Then Drail laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that filled the communication channel. You need reinforcements against children, General? Vorath did not laugh. His voice was flat and hard when he replied. Archon, I am asking respectfully. Send reinforcements, or send my replacement. Because I will not send more of my soldiers into those mountains. The laughter stopped. Drail studied Vorath's face through the screen. Whatever he saw there made the amusement drain from his eyes. I will send you 2,000 troops, Drail said slowly. And Vorath, deal with this, quickly. The channel closed. Vorath leaned back in his chair and looked at the mountains on his tactical display. Somewhere in that dark forest, 800 children were building, learning, preparing, and waiting. He had a terrible feeling that 2,000 troops would not be enough. The reinforcements arrived on the 8th day after the invasion. 2,000 fresh Drelith soldiers, equipped with the latest weapons, thermal-resistant armor, and jamming equipment designed to disrupt enemy communications. They came with heavy vehicles, combat drones, and enough firepower to flatten a small city. The officer who led them, Colonel Traxus, walked off his transport ship with the confidence of someone who believed the problem had already been solved by his arrival. He found General Vorath waiting on the landing platform and saluted sharply. "General, my troops are ready to deploy immediately. I have reviewed the situation reports. With respect, I believe the previous engagements failed due to insufficient force. That will not be a problem now." Vorath looked at him the way a tired man looks at someone who has not yet learned the lesson that exhaustion teaches. "Colonel, I strongly recommend caution. The mountain terrain favors the enemy. They know every path, every cave, every river crossing. Our standard tactics will not work here." Traxus smiled politely. It was the smile of a soldier who thought his general had lost his nerve. "Sir, they are children. I understand they have been troublesome. But 2,000 trained soldiers against 800 untrained juveniles is not a war. It is a cleanup operation." Vorath said nothing more. He had given his warning. He would not beg. The assault began the next morning. Traxus divided his force into 4 columns and advanced into the mountains from 4 directions simultaneously, intending to squeeze the children into a shrinking area and force them into the open. It was a textbook encirclement. It was exactly what the children expected. The first column hit a minefield within 2 hours. The explosives were buried under loose soil, made from Dralith munitions that had been stolen, taken apart, and reassembled into new configurations. The blasts were smaller than military-grade charges, but perfectly placed. They did not aim to kill. They aimed to wound. Wounded soldiers screamed, and screaming soldiers slowed down the entire column while medics rushed forward to help. The second column found that the forest path they were following had been altered. Trees had been cut and allowed to fall in patterns that created a maze, funneling the soldiers into a narrow canyon. When they were inside, the walls above came alive, with small figures who rolled boulders and dropped sharpened stakes. The column retreated in chaos. The third column encountered something more disturbing. Their communication equipment began receiving Dralith military orders. Authentic-sounding commands in perfect Dralith military code, ordering squads to change direction, regroup at false locations, and advance into areas that turned out to be kill zones. The children had cracked the Dralith communication frequencies. They had listened, learned the patterns of military communication, and were now using them to give false orders. Squads turned on each other in confusion, unable to tell which commands were real and which were fake. The fourth column made the deepest advance. They pushed through the forest for 6 hours without incident, and Traxus began to believe that the resistance had collapsed. Then the scouts reported movement ahead. Small shapes, running through the trees, heading away from the column. "They are retreating," Traxus announced with satisfaction. "Push forward. Do not let them regroup." The column accelerated. They chased the fleeing shapes through the forest for another hour, moving faster and faster, spreading out as the terrain grew rough. They did not realize they were being led. The running children were not fleeing, they were bait. The column ran directly into the deepest part of the cave network. The ground gave way beneath the lead vehicles, dropping them into hidden pits. The trees on both sides erupted with small explosive devices that created walls of fire behind and ahead of the column. And then, from every direction, from above and below, from inside the caves and from the canopy, the children attacked. It was not a battle. It was a trap that had been built over 2 weeks by 800 minds that thought in terms of games and puzzles and winning. Every piece of the forest had been turned into a weapon. Vine ropes triggered avalanches of loose rock. Hollowed-out logs filled with stinging insects were launched into troop formations. Mirrors made from polished metal reflected sunlight into the eyes of soldiers trying to aim. Water channels had been redirected to turn flat ground into mud that grabbed at feet and made movements nearly impossible. The children fought in teams. The oldest ones, 14 to 16, served as commanders and weapons operators. They carried cobbled-together rifles and knew how to use them with frightening accuracy. The middle ones, 10 to 13, were the main fighting force. They were fast, fearless, and everywhere at once, appearing from holes and gaps too small for any Draylet soldier to follow, striking hard and vanishing before anyone could shoot back. The youngest ones, 6 to 9, were the eyes and ears of the entire operation. They crawled through tunnels, climbed trees, and ran messages between groups with a speed that no communication equipment could match. In 3 days, the Draylets suffered over 600 casualties. And the children had learned a new trick that disturbed the Drayleth more than anything else. They took prisoners. Draylet soldiers who were captured were not killed. They were stripped of every piece of equipment, every weapon, every tool, right down to their boots. Then, they were blindfolded, walked in circles for hours, until they had no idea where they were, and released at the edge of the base perimeter. They arrived stumbling, barefoot, confused, and completely humiliated. The effect on morale was devastating. Death was something a soldier could understand. Death was part of war. But being captured by a child, stripped of everything, and sent back like a scolded animal was something else entirely. It broke something inside the soldiers. They began to look at the mountains with a dread that had nothing to do with combat, and everything to do with shame. On the 4th day, a Drayleth patrol found a group of the youngest children in a clearing. 7- and 8-year-olds, sitting in a circle, crying. They looked lost, frightened, and helpless. The patrol leader, a veteran of 30 years, lowered his weapon and approached carefully. One of them even reached for a ration pack to offer the children food. It was a performance. Every tear, every sob, every trembling lip was calculated. The moment the patrol was close enough, the children scattered like startled birds, diving into holes in the ground that appeared from nowhere. Half a second later, the ring of charges buried around the clearing went off. The patrol was buried in dirt and rock. When the dust cleared, the children were gone. The soldiers were half buried and groaning, and somewhere in the forest, high-pitched laughter echoed between the trees. Colonel Traxus lasted 5 more days before he came to Vorath. He did not salute this time. He did not smile. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a week. "I cannot win this, General," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Every tactic I use, they learn and counter within a day. They are faster than us, they know the terrain better than us, and they fight with no rules, no patterns, no predictable behavior. I sent drones. They shot them down with slingshots firing metal bolts. I sent armored vehicles. They dug pits and dropped them into caves. I tried night assaults. They see in the dark better than we do. They are children, and they are beating us." Vorath listened without expression. He had expected this. He had known from the moment he read the developmental psychology files that this would happen. But he had been overruled, and now over 1,000 Drayleth soldiers had paid the price for the Archon's confidence. "Pull back to base," Vorath ordered. "All forces withdraw from the mountains immediately." Traxus looked relieved and ashamed at the same time. He left to give the orders. That night in the prisoner camps, something strange happened. The human adults, who had been quiet and sullen since their capture, began to change. Word had reached them somehow. Whispers through the camp passed from one prisoner to another about what was happening in the mountains, about their children. The Drayleth guards noticed the change. The humans stood taller. They looked at their captors differently. Not with defiance anymore, with something worse. With patience. With the calm, steady confidence of people who knew something their enemies did not. One of the prisoners, a woman who had been a teacher at the colony school, caught the eye of a Drelith guard who was watching her nervously. She smiled at him. It was a warm, gentle, terrifying smile. "We told them bedtime stories about monsters, you know," she said. "They always liked the ones where the children won." The guard looked away. He did not look back. In the mountains, the children did not celebrate. They watched the Drelith retreat, and then they went back to building, back to planning, back to preparing. They were not finished, not until their families came home. The human warships arrived on the 31st day. Vorath saw them first on the long-range scanners. 12 ships, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation at the edge of the Arcadia system. They were not the panicked, rushing rescue fleet he had expected. They moved slowly, deliberately, with the calm precision of a force that had planned every step of its approach long before it arrived. The flagship was the UCS Resolve, a heavy cruiser that had seen action in 3 major conflicts. It was commanded by Admiral Reina Vasquez, a woman whose name appeared in Dominion intelligence files with a note that read, "Do not engage without overwhelming numerical superiority." Vorath did not have overwhelming numerical superiority. He had a battered occupation force, a mountain range he could not enter, and over 1,000 soldiers in medical care. He also had 2,000 human prisoners, which was either his greatest leverage or his greatest liability, depending on what happened next. The communication channel opened. Vasquez appeared on his screen. She was in her 50s, with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from dark stone. Her eyes were steady and gave away nothing. She did not make threats. She did not demand surrender. She asked a question. "General Vorath, I need to know one thing before we proceed. Are the children safe?" Vorath stared at her. Of all the things he had expected a human admiral to say, this was not it. Not a demand for the release of prisoners. Not a warning about the fleet's weapons. She wanted to know about the children. He let out a breath that was half laugh and half something else entirely. "Safe?" he said. "Admiral, I have lost over 1,000 soldiers to your children. They have destroyed my equipment, humiliated my officers, and turned my occupation into a disaster that will follow me for the rest of my career. Your children are not in danger. They are the danger. They are, without question, the most effective fighting force I have ever faced, and I have conquered 200 worlds." There was a long pause on the other end of the channel. When Vasquez spoke again, her voice was quieter, and there was something in it that Vorath could not identify. It might have been pride. It might have been sorrow. It was probably both. "Yes," she said. "They would be." Another pause. Then Vasquez leaned forward slightly, and her tone shifted to something more businesslike. "General, I am going to explain something to you, and I need you to listen carefully. Not as a threat, but as information that will help you understand why this situation must end today." Vorath nodded. "Humanity does not protect its children simply because we love them. We do love them, more than you can probably understand. But that is not the only reason. We protect them because we know what they are. We know what they are capable of. Every human society, across all of our history, has poured enormous resources into raising, teaching, guiding, and shaping our young. We do this because a human child is not a smaller, weaker version of an adult. A human child is raw potential, unlimited, undirected, and utterly without restraint." She paused. "When that potential is guided by parents, teachers, and community, it produces scientists, artists, builders, and leaders. When it is left alone, when it is threatened, when it is pushed into a corner with no